Okay, well, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. Just for my sake, since I was calling in remotely last time, can we go around and everyone say their name again? And I'll try to master them, matching with your faces. Let me start with you, Nate.
Supposed to be.
Okay.
So, yes, and Jeannie, Nate, could I see you guys in the hallway?
Nathan Ock, I'm a relations specialist with the Department of Digital Teaching and Learning here at USD.
Thanks, Nate.
Jared Wright here with USB in their assessment department.
Okay, fantastic.
Noel Oswald with Westminster College School of Education.
Fantastic. Thank you for being here. I'm really excited for the work that we're going to be doing. And that echo of my voice is going to drive me crazy. I hope it doesn't drive you crazy. So if you want to go into our team drive, do all of you have access to our team drive? I'm going to pull it up here too. In the February folder, I've got an agenda and the other documents that we're going to want to reference today. So what I'd like to start with today is just a brief recap of what we discussed last time, and then go into looking at what we feel our current reality is as far as implementation of the professional learning standards in Utah, as well as what the barriers to implementation are and what ideas we have. As I went to the Google Doc that I shared with all of you, I kind of started to feel like the things that I thought were barriers were also the opportunities for implementation, so I ended up kind of grouping them in the same. I just merged those two cells, but we can talk about that. And then with those in mind, we'd like to talk about, sorry for that echo. I would like us to be able to then move into talking about what type of resource we want to provide to Utah for professional learning standards, because I think we could all agree we don't want to just hand this booklet. We want to make something more user-friendly and easier to digest. So before we even talk about a toolkit, we'd like to look at what we want the resource to look like for the standards, and then from there add the technology piece to the standards, and then long-term look at a toolkit that would be supportive of implementation. And I thank you for being here and welcome participation and feedback as we go through this. That's kind of my vision, but please chime in. So let's start with a review of last meeting. We took a look at the structural and content setup of the standards. And thank you to everyone who participated and helped with that, both via web and here. It is in your February folder on the team drive as well. Towards the end, we were able to also look at connections between the different standards, and you can see those listed below each, the table for each standard. And then Mary and Nate and I took a minute to record our ratings for our own systems or LEAs that we're in terms of implementation of the standards. And if you would like to access those, they're also in the team drive. You can see my copy there. The PDF is Mary's. And then the Word document, I believe, is, no, the Word document is Mary's and the PDF is Nate's. Nope, the PDF is Mary's. We might have two of Mary's here. Let's see if Nate's in. I'll see if I can drop that in. But the point being, the point of having us think about it is to have a discussion now about what we feel like our current reality is. So let's just start there. Do you want to take a couple minutes to look over the documents that have been dropped in? Oh, good. Okay. Thank you.
So we have which one are you wanting to look at? Your
The reflections, uh-huh.
So there's the three different.
We're looking at the three that were completed, but it looks like Cassie didn't drop yours into the folder, Nate. Is it there? Okay. Oh, good, perfect. So are you the Word document or the PDF, Nate?
Yes, so I have that.
I'm sorry to hear that. Sorry to hear that. No problem. No problem.
It's, well, well, I would, see if you can, he's trying to point that. There's a share option,
Oh, Nate, yours is the second one in the PDF.
I'm not sure who owns this document or this folder, but that's going to house all of the documents. So you can either share individual documents or try and get her access. That's fine. So if I send this address, yeah.
I do.
Can you see if it's been sent in there?
It has, and I don't know why she doesn't.
Okay.
So I've just been sharing them with her separately as well. I'll send it to her via email as well. Okay, so if you want to refer to the reflections that have been done by Nate and Mary and myself, you're welcome to, but I was hoping to just have kind of an open discussion about where we feel like we're at in Utah and then what our barriers to implementation are and our ideas. Should we just go standard by standard? Okay. And because we're all coming from different places, this conversation will be helpful. Okay, so for example, under learning communities, as I thought about this in my own district, I think we're better looking at student needs with learning communities than we are using the learning communities to evaluate adult learning needs and drive professional learning that way. So I kind of gave two different ratings. I think PLCs in collaboration are alive and well, and pockets are doing it better than others. But we need to focus more on analysis for adult professional learning, I think. We're doing really well looking at student data and letting that drive instruction. What are your thoughts?
You're from Alpine, right?
I'm from Nebo School District.
These are alive and well. Alpine. I'm not sure. David already had different structural ghettos.
Yes.
That notion which is new for some districts relatively I've been this day, so I know it well.
Yeah, we have PLCs in our building, and I mean, even just in our building, they vary widely as far as how actually productive they are. You know, we have some that are really functioning well, and we have others where they just go into the vent session, and others don't even bother to meet. Yeah. On learning communities, as far as professional learning, I would not rate it very high. I don't know that there's a whole lot. I mean, some districts like our curriculum supervisor will send something out. What do you need? Or whatever. But it doesn't seem to be a whole lot of cohesive. I don't know how to explain it, but it doesn't particularly high.
It's still emerging as far as becoming part of the culture. Hey, just FYI, if you want to turn on your mics, if you push the button till the red light comes on, I think it'll pick you up better for Mary and Rich. Okay, and you're in Davis, is that right? Okay, thanks. And you are also in Davis? Oh, that's correct. Gotcha. Okay. All right. Jared and Nate, you guys want to weigh in?
Kind of traveling around the state, I think my experiences with PLCs have been similar in that the frequency with which they're implemented in both schools and districts across the state seem much more consistent these days than they were even 5 years ago. And the training that the leadership team, whatever that looks like for the PLC, gets varies widely, as you mentioned.
Yes.
And so in talking to teachers, I still frequently hear, like, I don't know what we're supposed to do in these meetings, right? Like, we meet every single week, and I don't know what we're supposed to do. So I don't see a culture of consistent, like, student work analysis or database decision-making or lesson study, or the types of things that best practices and research indicate make PLCs really effective. I don't see those things consistently being practiced within the PLC structure.
Yeah. Rich and Mary, you guys want to chime in on this?
We hear them very well.
I don't know if we can hear them at all.
Having a hard time with our people that are out.
They can hear us.
Hear us now.
Cass had something. Thank you. It's right.
Oh,
Oh, it's right here.
thanks. Rich and Mary, we're trying to figure out audio for you. Please. Oh, no, please. Rich, can you try to speak to us?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Oh, is that Mary? Mary, did you just talk to us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Somebody in this room has their microphone turned on.
A few of us do.
I'm talking about here. WebEx.
It's probably me. Is that way we're getting it?
Yes.
Thanks.
Now try it.
Hello? Oh, yay.
Nice. Sorry.
We'll get this figured out eventually, right? Okay.
So I have a thought as well, and that is with some of the rural schools being able to have enough people to even have conversations with, I think is sometimes a struggle. If you're the only one teaching, third grade, who do I meet with? But the same kind of reflects with special ed and how they interact with regular ed, and how those PLCs or learning communities can maybe be flexible and not so rigid as well, in including who needs to be part of the discussion.
We see that in Nebo, even though it's a larger district with teachers for CTE, for example, that might be a lone person in their building. So they try to have a monthly time where they get together and collaborate from all different schools. For example, like a welding teacher, auto body teacher. Yes, so lots of potential for support.
So you made a really important comment at the very beginning, and that is the whole notion that PLCs use data, and we hope they use data to make decisions about student interventions. The focus seems to be so much on student interventions, but how often are they using that student data to identify priorities for the school in terms of professional learning opportunities, and aligning the professional learning to those specific areas of need as identified by the data? I don't know. I don't think it's going on a lot, but I don't know what happens in Evo. You would have a better idea, since Evo and Alpine, I believe, in the state have done a lot more of PLCs than most other districts.
And I think we have pockets where it's happening better than others. And for me, I see it as a capacity building issue for instructional leaders, for them being able to have that vision at their school and see how they can support and collect data not only on student performance, but also adult needs related to those PLC discussions.
It should drive your professional learning in your schools.
Yeah. Am I still too quiet? Okay, sorry. Sorry, Rich and Mary.
You're my little quiet gal.
So looking at barriers to implementation, as I was saying before, I kind of combine those with ideas for implementation. Some things that I was thinking of, and please chime in here, are just more information and capacity building related to learning communities generally, and how, like you were saying, what are we supposed to do during this time, right? And building that culture and having a shared vision and understanding, as well as capacity building of instructional leaders. I think I'm too loud. Time, right? It's always about time, resources, and then attention and training given to the other teams that can be leveraged for leadership, like a dispersed leadership team, not just grade level teams. And like you were saying, well, what are the other creative, more flexible ways? Or did you say this too, Jared? We can look at teaming. Other ideas and thoughts on barriers or ideas for implementation?
I think scheduling is a big one. Ensuring, like, whoever is making the schedules for teachers kind of holds the key to set them up to be able to do it during contract time. That's definitely something that I've noticed, is that communities that build that collaborative time into a teacher's schedule versus asking them to do it outside of their normal teaching schedule are much more likely to be invested in the results and have consistent participation and interaction.
Yeah, I see that as being crucial to building that culture. And even though we've had set aside time in NEBO for, I don't know, maybe 15 years now, we're just now getting to the point where we're really seeing progress in terms of we're not just getting together to schedule during that time. We're actually looking at data. We're bringing common formative assessments. We're talking about what to do next. But again, it's still mostly student focused. We haven't transitioned to looking at, we haven't across the board, or even, I don't think, vision wise, really talked directly about using that to drive professional learning for the adults.
I think also there hasn't been enough training on PLCs and on how to use them effectively, because I think it's sort of a hit and miss. You know, we've had some training, but not everyone in the building was required to go. And so there are some teachers who have that buy-in, they have the training, they know what they're supposed to do, but then other people, even in their PLC, don't have that. And I think also what would be helpful is having administrators actually go to the PLCs. Ours might drop in for 2 or 3 minutes and then they leave. And I love our administration, but they're not involved in the PLC thing. And if they really want it to grow and be effective, they've got to be there. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's also the issue with transience or turnover, when once you've established a culture in a school, but then you have teachers leave and new teachers come in. Are we enculturating them? Are we bringing them on board? Do they have buy-in philosophically to the process? Something we need to pay more attention to, in NEBO at least, I think. Okay, let's move to leadership. How is this looking in the areas that you live? I 100% agree. Yeah.
Just a quick note, if you don't use your microphone, we can't hear what's being said.
Is that Rich? Oh, okay.
I can't hear anything.
To kind of build on what Lowell was saying, there's not a lot of infrastructure in Utah, or really in the United States in general, to help teachers build capacity as leaders and stay in the classroom, right?
Yes.
A lot of the tracks that we ask teachers to take if they want to be leaders kind of routes them into administration. And there's a lot of really interesting models that other countries use to develop leaders that are going to stay in the classrooms. And we're starting to get coaching within the state of Utah and more broadly, which is kind of a middle ground. But most coaches no longer teach. Once you become a coach, you're out of the classroom. And you kind of have one foot in the classroom and one foot out. But there's a lot to be said for leaders that are with students on a daily basis, I think, and the kind of potential and capacity that type of circumstance kind of builds.
Okay,
Thanks, Nick.
fly on the wall talking.
Bring it, Jeannie.
So for leadership, there are a few things going on. We have a lot of leadership initiatives that are going on with legislature, our board, and a few internally. I'm kind of the linchpin on all of them. And so we have various things going on with leadership. So your input on anything you have with this, I would greatly appreciate. If you want to do it via Cami, that would be great. As far as teacher leadership goes, we obviously have a number of things that are going on across the state, but it's part of our Title IIA submission within our ESSA plan that we submitted to the feds. And so one of the other subgroups, which is teacher leadership, is working on putting together a grant proposal for the LEAs to submit some type of application for that money. And one of the priorities I asked them to put on there is if they are willing to do a hybrid model so that they still have a teacher of record. And then they are also in a leadership position. For instance, there are three teachers in third grade, and there are, let's see, 90 kids. Sometime in the morning, usually with your more core subjects, math and language arts, you would have your lead teacher, doing a large portion of the instruction for the biggest part of the group that would of students. So it may go up all the way to 60 kids that are in there. The other two teachers are in there. To begin with, it's to observe, learn, and then follow up with conversations. Eventually, and a couple other states are doing this. Eventually, the goal would be to have some team teaching going on, as well as some non-critical observation by the lead teacher with what the other two teachers are doing, and that gradual release of them being able to take on this work. There are so many little details that could go on with it, but we really, really would like to see some innovation in using a teacher leader and letting them stay in the classroom. And working on teacher leader pathways. We also now have a CTE pathway for high school students to go into teaching. We're revising the 1010, and all of those types of things. So we're working on trying to keep those superstars in that classroom with those kids. All right, I'm out.
So may I ask, Rich, this is Lowell Oswald. Quick question. I know in the past Ogden's done a lot with coaching with PBS and MTSS implementation in your district. Do you still have a model in place for coaching teachers as it relates to professional learning opportunities? I guess he's not there.
Let me see if I can see if he's still on. Yeah, I don't see Rich. I wonder if he got disconnected.
So they have done some.
Got offended.
Yeah, I'm sure that was the case. I'm sure that was the case. But they have done some exciting things, Jeannie, that could address some of what you're talking about in terms of their support for teachers.
Where is Rich?
Coaching and feedback. He's isn't he superintendent?
Yeah.
Of Ogden? That's what I thought. Yeah. So
Yes,
we've worked with him in the past when I was at the Utah Personal Development Center. And they've implemented a really wonderful, robust coaching model that I thought he could maybe share.
And Wasatch District also has a really great one that they used in the Title IIA application to be funded, and I asked for them to follow up with me and let me know how that's going. So I'll keep you up to date with that info as well, and that's mostly coaching.
Nebo has a pretty robust coaching model. It's continuing to expand, but we have been interested in teaming with Washington. Is that where Robert Prophet is?
Yep.
Because they have been talking about a framework they have for providing like a baseline of capacity building professional learning for anyone who's a teacher leader. And trying to team with universities like UVU to make it like an endorsement. So we've been really interested in looking at that in Nebo in terms of now that our culture is grown to the point where everyone who's working with adults is being trained as coaches, trying to kind of think through the framework of what do they need to know in terms of adult learning theory, coaching strategies, ongoing support, so that everyone has kind of a baseline skill set capacity built within, and then ongoing support for those teacher leaders. So we're interested in collaborating with Washington on that. We've just got connected with them last week. So
Yes, and they do that with their mentoring. They have a differentiated mentoring model that they have a different first year teachers, second year teachers, third year. If they have superstar second year teachers, they'll bump them up to move forward with the third year teachers, and it's really great.
So a thought I have too is thinking back, and I think it fits here, but being able to not only have people come into the classroom and mentor, but allowing teachers to be able to watch other teachers teach and see how things are done. And that's often really tricky to do as far as time and kind of logistics of how you get people there. But I think it's one thing to talk about it in a meeting or have someone reflect, and it's another to be able to watch and view that. And with the technology that we have coming out, that's more and more an easier thing, I guess, to do as far as video and feedback that way.
We just did that today in my school. 4 of our English teachers, we rotated and kind of went to different teachers. We got one sub to cover us, and then we just would go and visit different teachers throughout the day, and it was fantastic.
Why did you go visit? Like, what was the goal?
So our district English supervisor kind of put it out there as an option, and she found a way to pay for anyone who wanted to go and visit other English teachers within their own building, just to see what was happening and to see if there are things in their classroom that work well that you might want to bring into your own, that sort of idea. So
I love the idea of using technology to provide feedback to peers in order to sharpen their skills. At Westminster, we're doing that with video analysis so that individuals can evaluate their own practice teaching and then meet with their peers and receive the feedback from their peers on their teaching. Great way, again, to improve their craft by having others provide feedback and insight and so on. A common theme I'm hoping throughout this would be that aspect, and that's the feedback and coaching.
Yes.
Because that's the only way we can affect change in the end, whatever it may be that we're shooting for.
I'm going to make a note of that.
one other thing I noticed, Nate, I think it was you on your feedback put on as the first thing, it's an obstacle, money on every single one. And that's part of it. I mean, I do quite a bit of professional learning, and I generally either have to take personal days or sick days because, and I've cleared it with my administrator. I've said, is it okay if I use my sick days for that? And he said, sure, but you shouldn't really have to do that. There are a few professional days. I think they have like 15 for the whole building for 1 year.
Wow.
And other than that, you just have to find ways to cover it. So,
Jeannie's going to chime in again.
Sorry. I should probably just be over here in Link's arms.
There's another mic over there.
Okay, I'll go grab that. I'll still hang out of the way, but
Okay.
just in case. Just so you know, I oversee the Title IIA program for the state.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things that I require the LEAs to do as part of their application is the first thing they have to do is talk about how their plan incorporates the definition of professional learning as far as sustained, long-term, job embedded, those types of things, not the one-day spray and pray. The other thing they have to talk about is how they are addressing the needs of more specifically, low income and minority. Yes, those two are the big focus of the ESSA work. But I ask them, their gaps, how do they focus on that? And the third one that they have to answer is, how are you using Title IIA funds with other funds in order to meet the needs of your district or charter? What are your big goals, your big plans, and how are you using multiple sources of funding or braiding those funds in order to support the things that are most important for your district to meet? Because you can't fund everything. You can't. And so with the new ESSA, there was more flexibility added than there was before in all of the title programs. And so we're really trying hard up here to ask those districts to consider, and charters, to consider how they can use that funding in a way that's focused on the things they need. So with Davis, I know they do a lot of work with instructional support. I know that Allison is just phenomenal with all of that. So it would be great for Davis to take a big chunk of that money, and they can pull it from different places, all that funding, if that's what, one of the focus points for them. So though funding will always be an issue. I don't care if you're in New York with $15,000 a kid. Funding's always going to be an issue. So we're trying to help with recommendations on some of the best practices that are out there for what you do have. Are you throwing it to a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there, or are you really focusing those various funding streams?
Love that. Thanks, Jeannie. I appreciate what you said, Lowell, about the importance of the feedback and the coaching, because I see that as a definitive need in capacity building our site-based leaders. They need feedback and coaching on their feedback and coaching, right? I see that as a huge piece, and as they develop, as they are built in their capacity to do that, I think they'll be able to better leverage the data and the feedback they're getting from teachers in order to drive a more effective professional learning and to support it. I've been doing a lot of work with administrators in my district this year, specifically elementary, and we are noticing a trend that with them, at least, that a lot of them believe that professional learning, effective professional learning, is delivering a faculty meeting. And that's not, so they need their vision broadened, and that's the work that we're trying to do right now in training them in adult learning theory and coaching, so they see that it's the follow-through after the faculty meeting that's the actual professional learning in effective practice, the coaching.
Something that kind of weaves into a lot of what we said and connects with what Jeannie mentioned initially is there are a number of kind of top performers throughout the world from a country perspective that have class sizes that are similar or even larger than the U.S. Over the past 10 or 15 years, or maybe even more than that, the U.S. has invested a lot of money in trying to get class sizes as small as possible, where a lot of nations haven't made those same investments. Instead, they've placed a second teacher in classrooms, which has the kind of opportunity cost or benefit of setting up those collaborative kind of experiences that are kind of second nature in schools that have PLCs instituted, but at a level that's of higher, I don't know, amplitude or whatever, because it's almost, in many cases, it's half the day that teacher is in one classroom and then half the day in another. And I just visited some schools in Chicago that were doing something similar, where they had 2 licensed teachers in classrooms, and many of those teachers are special ed teachers, something that we do reasonably consistently in Utah.
Pushing in.
Which is co-teaching models with a special ed licensed teacher and a subject area licensed teacher. But it seems like that is a norm of countries which have demonstrated remarkable achievement over the last 5 or 10 years, just as another idea out there.
How are they funding that? Is it typically because they're taking someone like a special education teacher and teaming them? In terms of FTEs, do you know?
So you're saying in other countries' cases, or
yeah, or even like in Chicago?
I can't speak to. I can probably speak to other countries a little better, but in all cases, this is just me like reading snippets of research from various places, and it seems like part of it is investment in teachers over class size shrinking. So putting caps of class sizes at a higher level. Many countries have, I don't know what they're referred to, but like classroom aides or paraprofessionals, which have focuses that, like, they kind of incorporate almost apprenticeship programs from university students that have focuses in those subjects, not necessarily the educational background, but someone who can understand the concepts and incorporates them into the kind of fold. And then a lot of those countries don't have teacher shortages in part because of all the support that teachers get, again, not least of which is money. And part of that compensation isn't just what you make when you get into teaching, but it's actually also providing compensation for a university student's experience when they're in school. And so part of those experiences right from the first year is getting those students into classrooms. And so they have a much larger pool of prospective teachers that they can incorporate into their systems in those ways. I wish that I could provide more substantive answers, but those are things that I've read that various countries do.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I'm happy to provide resources as I can find them as well if it's useful for anyone.
Thanks. Thank you. Mary, do you want to chime in? She's still with us.
Just a heads up, she's let me know that she does have to leave at 4:30. That she usually
Oh
has
yeah,
a class,
she has a
but
class.
She might still be there.
Oh. Rich is saying he's attempting to reconnect. I don't know how we lost him. This is such a great conversation. I just wanted to tap into Mary, but it looks like we've lost both Mary and Rich now. Okay, let's go to resources, which we kind of have started talking about already. Yeah. Let's talk about where we think we rate in Utah, and then what our barriers or opportunities for implementation are.
I think there's some really great examples of LEAs across the state that have gone the extra mile in ensuring that their kind of curricular departments and their technology departments and their professional learning departments are all aligned in kind of achieving the same vision.
Yeah.
I think Washington is one great example of that. I think Canyons is another great example. And I don't have deep knowledge about Davis, but when I was at Davis recently, they also seem to do a great job of that. And I know I've heard that Alpine does as well. Again, I don't have specific experience with it, but I think that alignment is really key to making sure that everyone's goals are the same versus each department setting separate goals and then kind of pursuing them at the cost of one another's efforts.
And the beauty of that shared vision is then you can allocate people and resources, leverage them in the best way possible.
Yep.
We've been working on developing a framework in Nebo School District that will achieve that same end. We're second year in, so we're still in process there. I think that's I've already seen it make a big difference in terms of alignment of vision and also allocation of resources.
Totally.
Any other comments on resources?
I think from a state perspective, at least what I see, this happens quite a bit where you have different sections at USBE essentially doing the same thing, but they didn't talk about it beforehand, and so you sort of find out as things are taking place, and you step back and think, wow, if we would have got together at the beginning, we could have been more effective, more efficient with our use and not be hitting the same thing over and over. When we, from assessment point of view, when we go to schools and we talk about certain things that we're doing, it seems like we don't want it to be one more thing. We want it to be sort of the way they do things. But when we do this, there's, oh yeah, we also have this, and we also have this, and we also have this. And when you get down to it, all of those could probably have been combined into one thing, because they're all trying to get the same goal or very similar, but no one communicated. So I think you're talking about kind of a district level, but I think at a state level, providing resources kind of fits in that same point of view too.
Cami,
Yes.
that's part of the leadership group. We sent out a survey to the specialists and the coordinators around the agency and asked for the different types of support that they are giving to administrators. I have since reported that to Darren, one of our assistants superintendents, Darren Nielsen. And so he's including that in the work we're doing with the board.
Great.
But one of the goals of another committee that I oversee is to create coherence in support specifically for our principals, making sure we have a shared message, making sure that we base everything on the leadership standards first and foremost. Everything starts there. And then the last one is that we're offering similar technical assistance. And anywhere there's overlap, we're going to be encouraging, as Jared said, those people to work together rather than say you do it and you can't do it anymore. We'll be looking for ways to group that. And we're hoping to make that a model, if we can get that all figured out. Make that a model so we can work with coherence internally so that we can then support our LEAs out in the field and all the wonderful work they're doing with some real life examples of building coherence within our own agency, because we preach a lot about that. But like Jared said, there's a lot of duplication and there's a lot of misinformation that goes out there as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
So timing is huge, and it's school by school, it depends on leadership, whether they will carve out time for teachers to meet PLCs or whatever you want to call it.
Yes.
And providing ongoing professional learning opportunities. I spent the morning at Taylor Elementary in Davis observing a student teacher. And Taylor Elementary is one of the schools of excellence, top 10 elementaries in the state. That principal, former special educator, carves out time for his teachers to meet on a regular basis, discuss student learning outcomes, and also aligning their professional learning with what they're determining or deciding in those meetings. They'll call them PLCs, but they have a name for the groups that meet regularly. So time is huge, and yet
Yes.
it depends on leadership as far as how much time is carved out for different priorities.
Well, and I think it's necessary maybe in the United States culture to change the shift of thinking from you're only teaching if you're in front of students to the fact that educators do need paid time to collaborate and be thoughtful about their work. It's not just the time spent in front of students. Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's move on to data. What are your thoughts in terms of where we're at and what are the opportunities?
This is another one where I think we do a better job with using data to help plan our instruction with students than we do for teachers.
Agreed.
It is rare that someone comes to me and says, okay, this is something I've noticed in your teaching, here's what we need to help you, or anything like that. I don't see that.
And I don't know that instructional leaders generally know what's available to them in terms of data collection or even where to start with the adults in their building. That's something that needs a lot of capacity building, I think. At least I see that as a need in our district.
It seems like the evaluation that's done each year could be used somehow. If it's done well, if the evaluation is done effectively and it's really honest feedback, then that would be great data to use to plan professional learning, but I don't see that happening.
Well, even leveraging something like PGP goals and self-evaluations that teachers do as part of the evaluation process, if administrators understood how to look at those and take those as data that could drive professional learning, that would be a great start because that's something already in place.
Cami?
Yes.
One of the things nationally that I've seen at the conferences and things that I've attended and conversations with my colleagues with similar positions is that we have a lot of data and sometimes we're not gathering the right data. or we're trying to make something out of data that's really not useful. So I think that, even internally, but out in the field, we could really use a lot of support and help in processing which data to gather and what are we just gathering and either not using well or don't need and it's not helpful.
And to what point is it overwhelming? And can we distill it?
Focus.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
I think related to that is finding the tools, usually technology driven, that allow the time for leaders to be able to easily analyze that data, or teachers. I know when I was a mathematics coach, I didn't have a tool that I knew of. Maybe there was one that existed, but I didn't know of it. In order to ask my teachers what they wanted to focus on, and then every time I'd go into the classroom, I'd be focusing on that. So I'd look for instances of asking probing questions to students, or instances of, talking even to the left side of the room, or whatever the focus of that particular teacher was. And so I'd be writing everything down on a piece of paper, and then I'd have to input it into some sort of system before I could then analyze it, right? And so there's all this time that goes into this, but there's surely tools in very similar ways to the softwares that's developed for students now that would be available to do that much more quickly and efficiently, I think.
And I feel like maybe this is something that we can especially consider when we look at the toolkit. Because, and just kind of going along with that, we're talking about tools to help us drive professional learning. And I think on the same token, we want tools that will then evaluate the effectiveness of that professional learning as well. Because I don't think, beyond exit cards, and surveys afterwards, what else is there? What else can we use?
So Thomas Guskey's 5 levels of professional development evaluation is a great place to start.
Great.
Looking at not only student outcomes, but other kinds of things that you consider to determine whether or not your professional learning opportunities are effective in your schools. And that 5-point criteria is really useful.
This is a national conundrum right now. I had a contract with Learning Forward to study professional learning in Utah, then kind of see where we are. And one of the things that I had asked for was a tool to evaluate, or, processes, to look at it. And the senior consultant, it wasn't Stephanie or anybody of any power and leadership, just laughed. And he said, yeah, we would all have that. I'd be very, very rich if I could do that, which was a little disconcerting and saddening. But I think Thomas Guskey, for sure, is an absolutely great thing to start with. I know our special ed section has a revised Thomas Guskey specifically. And then going to Nate's point, if a coach or mentor or whoever goes into a classroom with very specific purposes in mind, and I want to look at these 2 things, it will be much, much easier than having to do this massive scripting, which I've done in so many places. And it's hard to start coding that and determine where it is and how to keep track of it, for sure. So I think it would be fantastic if this group came up with 2, maybe 3 different ways that electronically our leaders, district and school level, can keep track of that.
That would be fantastic. In fact, crucial. I don't think we can give a toolkit out if it doesn't include these types of tools.
So on your state USBE MTSS site, it already includes some of these tools for evaluating professional learning.
Yes, our MTSS group was very heavily working on that. At the time, I know the person that directed that work here spent a lot of time on Guskey. That was his, huge, that was his really big focus, and he based a lot of it on that, but I haven't seen other tools, so that's great. I'll take a look. We have some things already. Woohoo!
Did you say MTSS?
So on the USBE MTSS site, it has a lot of those professional learning evaluation tools, including the Thomas Gutsky document, I believe, and others identifying what evidence-based professional development should look like. So they're already there and available. They're
Great.
just not used.
Good to know.
Typically the case, Jean.
I'm glad to know those are there. I'm going to go check them out.
Yeah, they're
Can I
great
access them? Can I search them, Jeannie?
I will send you the,
Okay,
I'll find the link
that'd be
right now and
fantastic.
send it to the group that's here.
That'd be great. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to learning designs. I'll start with this one, just kind of building on what I told you before about how our elementary principals think that being a good instructional leader is providing a faculty meeting. They gave professional learning that way. So I think that learning designs is huge there in terms of building an understanding of what constitutes effective adult learning and just understanding adults as learners and that they're developmental learners. And then, of course, from there, building learning strategies, including coaching and follow through.
I keep thinking of what we just talked about with the data and being able to not only understand or kind of have a goal or purpose for why you're collecting certain pieces of data, but then, okay, what do I do with this once I find out? And I think it connects very well to, okay, I have this particular goal or data piece. Now what do I do with it? And creating that learning, especially as you're talking about the leadership being able to do that, especially making sure they're connected to the classroom, as Nathan was saying. A lot of leaders haven't been there for a little while, so it's being able to connect. And anyway, I think that data piece kind of flows into then being able to create those designs for learning.
It seems like we automatically consider that, or more generally consider that for student instructional design, but I don't know why I don't know what's missing in our ability to do that for adult instructional design. And maybe it's just lack of mindfulness to start with.
So when we did the statewide surveys with Learning Forward, and we did, I think, 4 of them altogether, this was the lowest scoring standard in perception of both teachers and building level administrators. This is the one they struggled with most. And it came out in the work from the teacher leader group and all the focus groups they did as well. But one of the huge pieces that we really missed that I want to make sure that is there is learning designs need to include teacher input. Yes. That's what we are missing. Yeah. And it seems like a no duh. And I know we have, pockets of excellence around the state that definitely do that. But it would be great to support our LEAs in being able to look at ways to include teachers in that design. And, we're going into the micro-credentials and the professional learning and everything else, which is going to lend itself much more to getting teacher input. But generally speaking, school level and district level, and those charters that have satellites, where they have so many, we're missing the teacher input part.
I think it's key to driving the instructional design, but also informing what happens next. We have principals that are doing like the flavor of the month. Like this month we're looking at visible learning, and okay, you could spend a whole year on visible learning. So after they do the flavor of the month, understanding design to the point that they need to now see, okay, where are teachers at? Which goals are they working on within visible learning, for example? Where do they want to go? How much time do they need? Going back to what you've said several times, all that coaching and follow through.
The word design is missing.
Yeah.
There isn't an intentional design necessarily, other than trying to implement things from legislature, coming from us and down. One of the things we'll be working on this summer is a kickoff with building level administrators, and we're attaching it with MTSS work and the conference that they always do. And one of the things we're focusing on is how do you blend initiatives?
Love it.
So you have some that are coming from your district or your charter leadership, your board, whatever, and coming from us, coming from the board, the legislature. And so how do you prioritize which ones are your non-negotiables? And then how do you prioritize those other pieces? And are there initiatives that we're hanging on to because we like them? Or no, are we looking at whether or not they're effective? Kind of like the second grade or third grade teacher I worked with that was stuck on dinosaurs.
Yeah.
It was not in the core, but she loved it. And I think that happens sometimes with the initiatives that we get started with. So
Yeah.
that's another piece to think about.
I think part of it, a lot of the people who are in charge of professional learning at a district level or whatever have never been trained in adult learning.
Yeah, I agree with
And
that.
that's huge.
It's crucial.
I know I worked with Christelle through the whole Core Academy thing, and she was huge on adult learning. So we had training after training after training on how to do that, and the teacher input is one of the main things that you have to get that. And that was so helpful to me to really see, okay, if I'm going to be working with teachers, I need to know how they learn and doing that ahead of time. But I think that doesn't happen a lot.
And I think that the standards are based on adult learning theory, but they don't give us much adult learning theory. And I think that as we consider a toolkit, we will definitely want to include that for LEAs.
And maybe this is better discussed in outcomes, but I think something that shows up in a lot of Ella's work regarding adult learning is like having clear goals that are like stated, like these are the things that we're all working towards achieving, and obviously they need teacher input for buy-in. But something else that I wrote was that you were getting at initially, Cami, that's also related to that is consistency. The research, I've never seen any research that suggests teachers can change their practice in a demonstrable way in 1 month, right? And so if there's a new professional development focus each month, you're losing
You're killing them
all of that time
Yeah.
by not putting in big swaths of time on one or two objectives. So that consistency feels really tantamount to me.
Yeah, I love that. The one or two objectives that are not only developmentally appropriate to the teacher, but selected by the teacher, or at least in the wheelhouse that the teacher, because otherwise how do you expect ultimate transfer? Okay, other thoughts on learning designs?
I feel like I would be remiss to not also say, don't talk at people for hours on end.
Yes.
And ensure
Sit
engagement
and get.
strategies.
Yeah.
I feel like at this point it goes without saying, but no, it also.
But yeah, don't you find it's just like, we teach math the way we were taught math. I see a lot of administrators who deliver professional learning the way they received it, and it's not the most effective method.
It's remarkable to me how frequently people will be explaining with a PowerPoint and talking at me ways to effectively engage students rather than incorporating those engagement strategies and those, deeper thinking strategies.
Classic example. Yeah. Fantastic. Yes, we need that.
Tammy, you probably know about this already. There's a wonderful article published by Dunstan for that on effective adult learning practices that maybe we could add at some point to our.
Can you drop it into our February folder? Thank you.
It's Dunstan and Truvet. If you just do a search, they've got a lot out there. They're sort of the leaders in adult learning practices, and there's a number of different articles they've written. One in 2013 that addresses a lot of what we've been talking about related to design.
Thank you. I'm very interested in
I'll
that.
send you the article.
Thank you. I'll just throw a little plug here too for, since we're sharing resources, there's a book that I've been reading by Ellie Drago-Severson called Leading Adult Learning. I think
I've ordered that for the entire committee.
Oh, yay.
The whole 45 of us that are on
This is why I love it so much, because so many people out there talking to us about effective adult learning are giving us the strategies and protocols for effective adult learning, but Ellie actually gets at what's behind the foundational understanding behind all of those protocols and strategies, and it's fantastic. Looking at adults as developmental learners and how to identify where they're at and then move them. Again, not in a month, but how to give feedback, how to provide coaching and the correct balance of challenge and support based on where they're at. So I would highly recommend this book to all of you. Fantastic. Thanks, Jeannie.
Create to maybe not only provide resources, but why this is beneficial. And I don't know, somehow you would want that buy-in with those leaders that are providing this, but not doing it successfully.
We have found that if we will provide online modules for this type of thing, that people are more likely to take a look at the information. And it actually might be a good recommendation, which is some of the things that we have done with evaluation, for a principal to use it at a faculty meeting. And look at something that way. And so if we work with superintendents and charter leaders and talk to them, and so I would be happy to do the circuit and go to meetings for big leadership and say, once you guys are ready with this phenomenal resource for them, is say, there is a reason that these are in steps. These are things that that need to happen and they need to be aware of. And even if they think they know it, it'll be a great review, but everybody should learn a little bit from it. But if we will hand feed them, they will learn most. You can't control all of them, obviously, but I think most of them have really great intentions and beautiful, huge hearts, and any way that we can support and provide in your face professional learning for them, they'll take advantage of it.
Yeah, they'll eat it up. I think to your comment, Jared, not only support / training or modules, however we deliver it, on the design, but also the delivery. Both pieces in consideration, yes, which kind of leads us into the next standard, which is implementation. So let's go there.
I think we're lacking in the sustaining support. I've been teaching for 24 years. One time have I ever been asked after the fact, how are you using this in your classroom?
Wow.
So I don't think there's a lot of that sustained support afterwards, and that needs to change.
Which would be part of your adult learning theory as well, that noise and showers.
Yes.
Kind of one of those in your face.
Yeah. It's the coaching and follow through all over again. Yeah.
And it relates to what Nathan was saying as far as not switching it up every month to month. It's going to take a while to really feel comfortable with something, especially if it's totally new.
And seeing it through. Yeah, I love that.
I think this would also work really well with, we talked about the possibility of observing other teachers' classrooms. If you can, you learn about it and you start to implement it, and then if you can actually go see it in someone else's classroom, see how they're doing it, and then take that back to your classroom, that can be incredibly valuable.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's an important piece related to the coaching, is peer coaching / and or observing each other.
When we first started the whole evaluation process and developing that, well, not first, after they had it for a couple of years to kind of play with, and we're still not quite in full implementation mode, we specifically surveyed administrators to say, what are the issues with this? And resoundingly was time to do it. And, it wasn't something that we could solve, but every time I met with the superintendents with these groups, I would have them in groups talk to each other and say, and think of, big bodacious goals for what they could do for that time, and things that they thought were more reality. And I know that many of them went back and implemented some things. So maybe I can check in with that. But again, in part of that toolkit, any ideas that we can provide for them that are a very typical problem. Where do you get the funding? Where do you get the time?
Good.
That type of thing will be very useful. And we'll kind of remove those individuals that say, we can't do it.
Yeah, I like that. I appreciate that. Talking about evaluation, that made me think of this, Jeannie, when you mentioned evaluation, is the idea, I think this relates to implementation, the idea of leveraging those evaluations as a coaching moment and having administrators treat it that way as an opportunity instead of let's get this done, we're going to check the box. Why not leverage it as a coaching moment? And then there you go. They've got some data there. They're supporting teachers along the way. And I think a lot more valuable experience for the teachers to walk away with 1 or 2 ideas that really have resonated with them, that they intend to apply instead of being raked over all of the standards. Yeah? What do you think, Kristen?
For the last 14 years with PYE, we have told administrators, you're going to have your mentor be that coach. You can't do both alone.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
That's, we have to take ownership as leadership here that we've told them, no, don't do both.
Well, and I think that there needs to be a clarification because in coaching, the door doesn't swing both ways. A mentor coach can't evaluate, but an evaluator absolutely can coach. And that needs to be yelled from the rooftops, I think. Yeah.
And I think that relationship would benefit from some pretty intentional language.
Thank you.
Like when it comes to coaching professional development that I've received and the kind of research that I've looked into, they always try to make a very clear line in the sand between evaluators and coaches. And so I think that it could be confusing to suggest that administrators are coaching teachers in those circumstances, but I totally agree with the sentiment that those evaluations should be treated as learning opportunities, right?
How they can be an evaluator yet use some coaching skills to get the biggest bang for their buck out of that moment. Is that what you're saying, Nate? Yeah. But I agree, we need to clarify that for them.
I think it's a great idea. It's not happening. At least I shouldn't say that across the board, but 99% of the time I feel like the evaluations are just jumping through hoops. And they come in, they observe for 20 minutes, they tell you everything's good, and then you move on. And I don't know.
See, and to me, that's such a wasted opportunity because you're going to spend the time together.
This last time, my administrator actually asked me, he said, tell me what you want me to look for. And so I told him, and then he came in, and that to me was probably the most valuable
Good job.
that I've had, just because he asked specifically, okay, what is it you want to work on?
What you cared about.
And I'll give you feedback on those things.
Love it.
And that to me was really helpful. So.
Yeah.
But most of the time, that's not what you get.
Yeah.
I think connected to that it's important to include teachers at both sides of the spectrum, the struggling teachers and the really high-performing teachers. I don't think that because a teacher is high-performing that should preclude them from the opportunity to continue to grow.
Amen.
And really frequently, I have had experiences where high-performing teachers just get the box checking, whereas the lower performing teachers are getting the hammer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. It's such a disservice because your high performing teachers are actually going to grasp and run with coaching with that type of professional learning the most.
I apologize. I'm sending you all kinds of resources.
Oh, thank you. I love it.
Email's going to be full today.
Thank you.
Implementation science, just touching on that. We know a lot about what it takes to implement at the district level, not even the school level. Dean Fixon has done a lot of work to help guide districts. He's been here, he's worked with us to help guide districts with implementation of things like positive behavioral interventions and supports, RTI, MTSS now. This document is wonderful. Again, something that could be in our toolkit. Talks about specific features of effective implementation at the district level, what's required to help make it happen in the schools. And so district by district, we have in say, we have some districts like Ogden that have implementation teams, and their primary focus is on how we can implement certain best practices in the schools. Anyway, that document I've sent you already shares exactly what it requires to be successful at implementing an effective practice like what we're talking about, professional learning in our districts and schools.
Thank you. Thanks. Share away. Fill my in my inbox. I love it.
Okay, can I plead ignorance? I have no idea what MTSS stands for.
Multi-tiered system of supports.
That's an
Okay.
initiative we began in the state
Okay.
in 2011 through this federal grant. It replaced RTI.
Okay.
Response to intervention focuses on achievement, and more comprehensive, focusing on academics and behavior support. Davis for a long time has really focused on the behavioral aspect. Other districts have focused on the academic aspects. We're combining the two under the umbrella of MTSS, and the state's been in the process of implementing that for the last 5 years.
Well,
But
thank you.
it's been very slow, so don't feel bad to get to the secondary schools. Mostly,
I've literally never heard that.
What's
so.
the acronym? What does the acronym stand for?
there's a multi-tiered
Oh.
system of supports,
Okay.
or in Utah we call it UMTSS, but it's a combination of both behavioral and academic tiered supports.
Okay. Thank you. I hadn't heard it either.
Okay, thank you.
Don't feel bad, and I apologize for using that.
No, that's all
okay.
right.
I'm very familiar with
That's the one I'm
RTI, but not
familiar with, but
MTSS.
that- yeah.
My background is special ed, so I'm into that.
Well, and originally it was just like differentiatable instruction, right? It was just 3-tiered instruction, and now it's like it's kind of grown into this thing that encompasses a lot.
Which
It's
appropriately so, because you can't always attribute learning to just the academic factors, right? Yeah. Love it. Okay, any other words on or thoughts you want to share on implementation? Let's go to outcomes.
I think this one to me ties in with implementation as far as the educator performance, the outcomes of educator performance. That's, I don't think at this point there's really any looking at educator performance afterwards.
We look at students, but not.
But even that, I don't know that we look at, so if I go to a professional learning class on something, I don't know that anyone ever comes back to my classroom later and says, okay, how are your students doing on that thing to see if it actually made a difference. I don't see that happening.
To me, that's the
That's the goal.
golden question
The goal
is
is,
how can
are
we
my
measure
kids learning what they need to learn because I went to this professional learning or I learned that
Yes.
thing? And I don't see that that is actually happening.
Yeah.
But that's how we should begin in designing our professional learning, and that is what are the outcomes, where do we want to go, and identify professional learning that will align with those outcomes, and then
Yeah.
design backwards from there. So that's a challenge in our system. Part of that system where we just get it backwards.
the team of coaches at an alternative school that I worked at for a number of years. We always thought about 5 things when we were developing our kind of year-long professional learning strategy. And so it started with goal, and then we provided information, then we provided support. There was some accountability measure, and then there was data. So with those 5 things, that was like our cycle. And we based it on something that I don't remember at the moment what it was. It was something that was based in research, and I'm sure I could find it if I looked for it. But like that kind of cycle of like we're starting with these outcomes. We're going to provide information to help teachers like get to it, which was usually the like hour that we had per month with everyone in the entire staff. And then there was individual support where we'd go out, talk to teachers, help them set their own personal goals. And then there was accountability. So you need to come back next month with a lesson taught, you know, whatever we decided made sense, and then there was data that somehow we gathered to decide whether or not it was successful. And that felt effective at providing that kind of support you're speaking of, Mary, where it's not just like, here's some information, now do something about it. Maybe we'll never talk about it again, but you're expected to like incorporate this. It was like this kind of cyclical, hopefully elevating process. So that was the aim.
So a couple thoughts I have with this is, well, it was kind of brought up, but being able to have individual outcomes, or at least more individualized, rather than everyone in the faculty goes to this PD or professional learning, and it's going to be the same thing whether you need it or not. You just come, and so to be able to have teacher input in what do you want to get out of it, rather than the leaders saying what you should get out of it. I think that's important. And then the other is making sure those outcomes, well, it all reflects back on this whole thing, but you have some data or reasoning why you want those outcomes. It wasn't because some person came to your school and said, this program's going to be amazing, you should do professional learning on this program, but the leader actually takes hold and says, this is where we're going or where we'd like to go, and kind of going back to the resources, what do I need to get there? But the outcomes are, as have been mentioned, are foremost in their thoughts, not just day to day.
Yeah, thank you. Well said. You know, I think I'm just looking at the subheading 3, build coherence, starting with pre-service program and continuing throughout the educator's career. I think that's a phenomenal idea. I don't know to what extent that's happening. Maybe more now than when I first graduated university. Even when I was working as a supervisor of student teachers 10 years ago, it seemed like once they graduated, it was like, okay, I've arrived. I'm here, everyone. Instead of them seeing it as this developmental process throughout their career. Do you know what I'm saying? So seeing big, like you were saying, Jared, big picture outcomes.
Well, we sort of
Vision.
do that, right? We say, oh, you're here. Well,
Yeah.
now we have 3 years to kind of see, but it's, oh, you're a teacher. Good luck. Here's your
Yeah.
classroom.
Yes.
Hope you survive. Sometimes.
But I think, too, the way that we evaluate either perpetuates that mindset or shifts it. Because if we evaluate and use the standards as a developmental continuum of support, teachers are going to see that differently than the evaluation where they walk in and feel like they need to justify why they deserve a certain rating from an administrator. And I don't know to what extent either of those are happening. You know, which one happens more across the state. But I definitely think it influences our discussion on outcomes. Okay, thanks for that awesome conversation. That was very robust. I got a lot out of that. Thank you. And I've made a lot of notes here based on the things that you have said and comments that have been made. My goals for today, just looking back at the agenda, were to look at our current reality and have that conversation as kind of a jumping off point to think about what we think is most important to include in our version of the professional learning standards. So rather than taking this booklet and building our toolkit off of this booklet, deciding as a subcommittee what we think is most crucial and the best way to give that information. I know last time Nate mentioned even the possibility of an infographic, a way for people to more easily understand the standards. So kind of thinking about that, and we're about to the end of our time today, so this can be transferred to our next meeting. I'm going to tell you where I think we're going next, and you tell me if you agree or how you would tweak it. It would make sense to me that we talk about what we want our resource to look like for Utah, and then begin the work of creating that verbiage, filling in the blanks for that resource for the current standards that exist, and then look at plugging in technology. What do you think? That makes sense to me. So basically decide if we want to do an infographic or how we want it to look, and then create what we have, and then yes. So for example, Lowell, will you hold up that sheet that you've got right there? This is a document that we have that's the standards at a glance. So this could be something that we choose to revise and or include an infographic on the back and or have a one. I don't think we want a booklet like this, but we want something that a little more substantive. Yes, and that all of the LEAs, once we give the toolkit out, can use as their kind of frame of reference for the standards.
And I hope that there is a digital version that is interactive in a way that is kind of engaging and interesting.
I love that.
Versus just a PDF that you like stick in places that you have to zoom in to read the wording and
fantastic. Whatever. I love that. So that's ours to decide and create. Is that where we want to go next? That makes sense to me.
And then you said the 8th learning standard technology would be added later?
Well, I was just thinking once we decide structurally how we want it to look for the ones we currently have wrapped our minds around, then we can plug in and do research and pull out. We're going to need to spend some time deciding what we think is most important related to technology because we don't have anything already there. Yes? So what's the best way to proceed? Is it better for us to pull out the essential pieces of the standards and decide what wording we want to be there and then decide graphically how we want it to look, or decide graphically first and then pull the
decide
information?
Graphically first, because then you know how much you need to pull out.
Okay.
And what kinds of things you need to pull out.
Okay, so next time, how do you feel about that being our work next time we meet? Is talking about graphically. What resources do we need to help that be effective? Do we need some examples of what that could look like graphically? Does anyone know off the top of their head or have some ideas of where we could look for examples like that? Nate? Fantastic.
Yeah, I can. It would be useful. This is related to what Lowell has been able to successfully do that I have not been able to do during this meeting, and that's multitask, which is can say things that might be helpful for the conversation while also sending resources. I am not skilled in that area. So if you could just send an email that would be my accountability measure.
Yes.
I can send you some examples, and what I was thinking about it from an exemplar standpoint would be like how other institutions have achieved this work versus like mocking up what I think it might look like, just to make sure that I understand.
Yes, that's what we want.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can provide a couple of those, and if anyone else has others, those I think would be useful. In addition to that, if you could also, and maybe this is later on when we're developing the toolkit, but I'm sure that a lot of us would have some tools that would be useful for that.
Already
and if you could just
exist.
like hold people accountable through an email or whatever the circumstance is, that would be helpful for me.
Thank you, for sure. Yes. Okay, any other thoughts or input you want to give on next steps?
So I'll send you an infographic that I created with some folks here at the state recently, Linda Gallo and others, just as a sample.
Thank you.
Maybe not,
Thank you.
being helpful now, but
So that would be great. So I see our work next time being taking a look at these infographics and then kind of deciding what we want our structure to look like. Yes? Do we feel good about that? Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for your time and for participating in this work. I appreciate what you bring to this subcommittee, and I'm really excited about the work that we're doing. I will send a follow-up email to kind of bring those that weren't able to attend today into the loop. And then I also wanted to talk to you about upcoming meetings. When we first met in November, we talked about March 14th and April 25th as our next meetings. Does that still sound good to everyone from 3 to 5 p.m.? Would it be better for me to send a doodle out and see when the majority of our subcommittee could be here? Because I feel like I love the group that we have, but I feel like we could benefit from having more here. Okay, so are you okay with me sending out a doodle and then we'll decide our next dates from there? Okay, fantastic. Okay, any other comments or parting thoughts you want to share? Thanks for being here. Thanks for your time.